$28 billion ally betrayal rocks U.S. defense industry.
Defense dominance shattered. South Korea takes the lead.
Panic in Washington. Closest allies just defected.
U.S. weapons rejected. The unthinkable just happened.
For more than 70 years, America's defense empire stood unchallenged. From Europe to Asia, allies lined up for U.S. weapons, paying premium prices for the promise of American protection. Washington dictated the terms, and the world obeyed. But something just cracked. Canada and Australia, two of America's closest allies, just turned their backs. Instead of buying American, they've signed a staggering $28 billion defense pact with South Korea. This isn't a minor deal. It's a defection, a betrayal at the heart of America's security network. And it raises a chilling question. If even Washington's most loyal allies no longer trust America's weapons, is this the beginning of the end of U.S. defense dominance? For decades, the story was simple. America built the weapons, allies bought them, and the cycle never broke. Fighter jets, missile shields, tanks, surveillance systems. Each purchase reinforced the idea that U.S. defense wasn't just an option, it was the only option. The pattern felt permanent, until now. Canada stunned Washington by entertaining a sweeping South Korean package worth as much as $24 billion. Submarines, artillery, armored vehicles. Not a side order, not a trial buy, but a plan to rebuild major parts of its armed forces without American primes at the center. That single move shattered the illusion of permanence, and before the dust settled, another shock landed. Ottawa and Canberra didn't just talk about cooperation, they signed a $4.2 billion radar deal to build the Eyes of the Arctic. Over-the-horizon radar, the system designed to peer past the curve of the Earth and detect threats long before they arrive, would now carry an Australian stamp, not an American one. Think about that. For decades, Canada's big-ticket defense buys defaulted to U.S. systems. Political alignment, interoperability, and sheer habit made sure of it. Yet here we are, one ally supplying Ottawa's most strategic sensor grid, another pitching to replace core weapons fleets. That's not a deviation, that's a new direction. Why is this happening now? Because three tectonic pressures converged at once. First, political strain, trade fights and tariffs that made America look less like a partner and more like a risk. Second, program fatigue, U.S. weapons arriving late, over budget with endless fixes. And third, competition, a new wave of Asian defense giants led by South Korea, offering cheaper prices, faster delivery, and something Washington rarely provides: local jobs and technology transfer. Take Canada's fighter dilemma. The F-35, once untouchable, turned toxic in domestic politics. Cost overruns, endless debates, boycotts at home. Suddenly, the crown jewel of U.S. air power wasn't guaranteed. Ottawa began reopening the conversation, sending one message loud and clear: America no longer gets an automatic yes. Meanwhile, Australia flipped its script too. For years, it was the buyer, relying on U.S. tech to guard its vast territory. But with this radar deal, it became the exporter, landing its largest defense sale ever, and doing it not in Asia or Africa, but inside North America's most sensitive shield. For Washington, that's humiliation, an ally outcompeting U.S. firms on their own continent.
South Korea's rise adds salt to the wound. Its defense firms aren't just selling equipment, they're selling certainty. Delivery on time, prices that stick, offsets that create factories and jobs on the buyer's soil. It's procurement wrapped in politics, giving leaders something tangible to point to at election rallies. And for publics tired of American entanglements, buying Korean isn't betrayal, it feels like independence. The Arctic radar makes the message louder still. Canada isn't just buying gear, it's making a statement. We will defend the North on our terms. In an era of Russian bombers, long-range missiles, and new shipping routes, sovereignty is everything. And if the best eyes for the Arctic are Australian, not American, Ottawa will take them, no matter the optics in Washington. That's what U.S. primes truly fear. Once an ally breaks the habit of defaulting to American weapons, the psychological moat vanishes. Korean subs or artillery no longer look like risky alternatives, they look like new defaults, and the US is forced to compete on merit, a contest it hasn't had to fight in decades. Even Canada's politics reflect this new reality. The radar deal wasn't quietly filed in a defense ministry report. It was announced by the Prime Minister, with timelines, sites, and milestones already laid out. That's not shopping, that's committing. And once bureaucracies commit, paths harden. America's place in that path? Optional. And here's the bigger truth. Interoperability, once America's trump card, isn't exclusive anymore. Modern vendors sell NATO-ready systems, plug-and-play integration, even Five Eyes-compatible frameworks. If Australia's radar can slot into NORAD, the argument that only US kit works collapses overnight.
Economics twists the knife further. American systems arrive with sticker shock and delays. Rivals arrive with factories, offset jobs, and promises of shared technology. In political terms, that means local leaders can point to jobs created at home instead of checks mailed abroad. And if voters reward those deals, expect the trend to spread like wildfire. Which leads to perception. In America, this won't be framed as technical nuance or procurement detail. It will be framed in the language that terrifies politicians. Allies defect, billions gone, American jobs bleeding. Even if US industry still dominates overall, the perception of cracks is enough to trigger hearings, budget fights, and media panic. And perception isn't the only danger. In Canada, buying US weapons now carries reputational risk, boycott campaigns, angry headlines, political heat. For Canadian leaders, buying American can look like weakness. For Korean or Australian sellers, it looks like opportunity. And once that dynamic sets in, Washington's dominance isn't just challenged, it's undermined from both ends. So zoom out. America's defense dominance rested on three pillars: interoperability lock-in, industrial superiority, and political alignment. One by one, those pillars are wobbling. Allies can get interoperability elsewhere, industrial superiority can be undercut by speed and cost, and political alignment can fracture under tariffs and domestic backlash. No, America isn't out of the game. But the spell of inevitability, the aura that US weapons were the only answer, has broken. And once a spell breaks, minds change. Officials start asking dangerous questions. Who delivers faster? Who shares more? Who won't weaponize dependence? And for the first time in generations, the answers don't automatically point to Washington.
That's the real story. Not a single contract, not one radar system, but a pattern. A steady migration of trust, technology, and treasure away from the United States. The only question now is how far that migration goes and what it means for America's future. The first cracks are here, but the real danger lies in the chain reaction that follows. Because once Canada and Australia break the spell, other allies start asking the same forbidden question. Why should we keep buying American if there are better, faster, cheaper options? That's the nightmare scenario in Washington. Think about Europe. Germany, Poland, and others are already diversifying, picking Korean tanks, artillery, even warships. Each purchase chips away at the US monopoly. Each contract signals that interoperability doesn't have to mean dependence. And think about Asia. Nations that once saw US weapons as a shield against China are realizing they can arm themselves through South Korea, Japan, even Australia, without becoming hostages to Washington's politics. If Seoul can sell Canada subs, why not Indonesia? Why not the Philippines? The ripple effect is brutal. For every billion spent abroad, American primes lose not just revenue, but jobs. Skilled manufacturing jobs in states like Texas, Alabama, Missouri. Jobs tied to assembly lines, part suppliers, logistics hubs. And once those jobs vanish, they don't come back. That's where the story collides with ordinary Americans. Politicians can frame this in grand strategy terms, but voters will see it in paychecks. Defense plants cutting shifts, small towns losing contracts, communities built around defense work suddenly bleeding. For families, it won't be South Korea won a contract, it'll be Dad's job is gone. And here's the paradox. America still spends more on defense than anyone else. But dominance isn't just about money, it's about perception. If allies perceive US weapons as overpriced, unreliable, or politically risky, no budget can save the empire. The brand itself starts collapsing. Look at the timeline. Canada's radar buy runs to 2029. Korea's package stretches into the 2030s. That's a decade of contracts locked away from US firms. A decade of headlines reminding the world that Washington's grip is slipping. In geopolitics, a decade is enough to reset the map. So what happens next? Three scenarios emerge. Scenario 1, retrenchment. Washington doubles down, throwing subsidies, lobbying, and political muscle to drag allies back into line. It works for a while, but resentment grows. Allies feel coerced, not convinced. Scenario 2,
competition. US firms adapt, cutting costs, speeding timelines, offering jobs and tech sharing like their rivals. That would keep America in the game, but it would mean abandoning the old arrogance that allies have no choice. That arrogance is already gone. Scenario 3. Collapse. Washington ignores the warning. Allies drift further. Contracts pile up elsewhere. By the mid-2030s, the unthinkable becomes reality. America is no longer the default arsenal of democracy. It's just another supplier, one option among many. And hovering over all of this is China. Beijing doesn't need to outsell the US directly. It just needs America's allies to doubt, to diversify, to hedge. Every South Korean contract, every Australian export, every European deal away from Washington is a silent victory for Beijing, because fragmentation is as good as defeat.
The question is no longer if America's defense dominance is eroding. The question is how fast and how far. Canada and Australia have already crossed the line. Others are watching. And Washington, for the first time in living memory, is watching its empire crumble not from enemy attack, but from allied betrayal. This isn't about contracts, it's about confidence. For 70 years, US defense was the anchor of the free world. Now, allies are slipping that anchor, one deal at a time. History may look back at this moment, a $28 billion defection, as the start of a new era. An era where America's defense empire wasn't defeated by rivals, but abandoned by its friends.